I'm JP Gounder with Forrester, and this is my colleague Dave.
Hi. I'm with Forrester as well.
We are here this morning to talk about rethinking technology strategy in the age of what we're calling the cloud worker. And what we're going to do is tag team a little bit. I'm going to start out by presenting some insights from a study that our colleagues and ourselves conducted to understand this emerging class of worker that we're calling the cloud worker. So I think I'll get started.
Sounds good. Did you want to do a more introduction on kind of what you cover in research?
You know, I am somebody who looks at the future of work, essentially.
Yeah. And I look after employee experience, which for us is one part organizational behavior and psychology and one part technology. We try to understand that relationship to help companies create places where people can do the best work that they're capable of.
So both of these themes are going to play heavily here. So what we did was we created some studies, quantitative, qualitative studies, and we're going to be basically focusing our analysis on that today. To do this, we surveyed lots of IT decision makers, over 1,000 of them globally, and we also did something that's really important in this new world, which is actually talking to the workers themselves. So we surveyed hundreds of employees, we conducted qualitative interviews, and we just give you this as a background to show that this research was done very recently in service of answering the question, how is the cloud equipping workers to become more effective at their jobs, right? So what we're going to cover today is the rise of what we call this cloud worker. And it's a category of information workers who I'll define in some depth in just a moment. But these are people who are taking maximum advantage of the cloud in order to get their jobs done more effectively. And we see this as a trend that will expand over time. We're going to then talk about some of the approaches that IT decision makers, and very much business decision makers as well, can take to help those employees become more effective using tools from the cloud. We're also going to then talk about technology strategy. Many of you may be equipping your workforce with new technology on an ongoing basis. And we're at this sort of inflection point where we've sort of delved into mobile. We know that employee experience is important, but we may not have a sort of strictly defined understanding of how the cloud is intersecting with our workforce. So we'll start to give you some tips there. Then I'll hand it over to Dave. And he's going to talk about employee segmentation and how you can look at your workforce in segments and make those people very effective. So let me start out by talking about the rise of what we're calling the cloud worker. Recent developments across the industry, across your organizations, mean that there is more space for using the cloud to help your workers. And these include things like technology innovations, whether they are relatively recent ones, like mobility or social in the enterprise, or whether they're sort of vanguard, right, like artificial intelligence or voice, using those tools to help your employees. Those technology innovations go hand in hand with some changing employee needs. Of course, we've been talking about this for years in theory. What we're going to show you in some of the data is that we've reached an inflection point where all that talk about working anywhere across different devices is starting not only to become a reality, but it's becoming a need that you have to equip workers for if you want to be successful. And then finally, employee expectations. Right now, we're in a very, very competitive labor market that waxes and wanes, but there's been a permanent shift in kind of the expectations that your workers bring to their experience. And that also will lead into some of the stuff Dave will tell you about with segmentation and employee experience. So these three megatrends are sort of informing the need to the cloud. Let me get a little more specific for you, though. Now, there's a lot of data on this chart, but I do want to spend a moment talking through some of it because it's very interesting. Remember at the top I said we surveyed both workers and also IT decision makers. And what we wanted to try to understand were, how did these two things move in tandem, right? Are there some emerging categories of needs that workers are experiencing that IT decision makers are starting to also offer up solutions for? So I'll start with the first one here. And I have a little laser pen, because I know this is very complex. I'm going to be looking right here. These are attitudinal statements that we crafted to try to understand whether people agreed with them. So the first one here is, my technology needs for work are constantly changing. And almost 2/3 of information workers said that they agreed with that statement. Now, constant change is a relatively new phenomenon in the workplace. You know, even 10 years ago, we would find that well, I mean, things changed a bit, but you still had your kind of laptops and your desktops and your client programs. The world is changing at a much faster pace, and that's reflected in how employees are feeling about this. Now, in turn, these IT decision makers think about this as well, right? And we ask them to reflect on the statement, rapid technology changes have drastically evolved the organization's expectations of employees' day-to-day work. Now, of course, Dave and I talk to lots and lots of folks like you all the time, and one thing we've learned is that organizations are much more responsive than they used to be to the needs of employees. They may not be there yet, and some of you in the audience may be thinking, gosh, we're not fully there yet. That's a journey. But what we're finding is that this acceleration in the adoption of new technologies, and again, things that are on the horizon like AI, mean that the cloud becomes a very powerful asset, and that's one way that folks are actually addressing this. Another statement, I rely on my IT organization to continuously improve their approach to the devices and applications that support productivity. So this is, again, 73% of information workers globally agreed with this statement, and the counter to that by the IT community was, we always consider employee experience as a top priority in decisions about devices and business applications. Right? So they kind of go together. Employee expectations, employee needs are starting to be reflected in what IT decision makers are doing. That journey isn't complete, but we see good evidence that it is important. How about I prefer technologies that give me greater flexibility in how and where I do my job, paired with giving workers access to business applications anytime, any place, from any device is now business critical. Now, that's an important point, and we all know, those of us in here who are technologists, that that's easier said than done, right? Giving someone access to everything that they need to work on, all their digital assets, all the business applications on any device remains a challenge. And again, this is something where we think the cloud can play a role. Finally, to succeed in my job, I need instant access to information from a wide variety of sources. Sounds like me. And 80% agree among information workers. And then from the IT community, complementing employee tasks with technologies like AI, cloud, and mobility is crucial to my organization's future. So what you can take from this is that employees have articulated a set of needs and expectations, and IT decision makers are starting to believe that they agree with those things. In other words, they're starting their response. Many of you have probably invested in mobility, for example, to solve some of the problems that I've just articulated. But that journey isn't over yet, right? We don't have kind of the kind of experience that is totally seamless in every company. So there's work to be done, and we think that the cloud plays a role. So one other thing that we tested here was to try to understand how cloud-native information workers are already today. So this was a very shocking statistic. We asked people, do you use your laptop, tablet, smartphone, or wearable device for work purposes while commuting, traveling, or at home? Now, among this group, a whopping 94% said that they do at least one of those things. That is creating space, right, for a great need, because you need a certain amount of flexibility in the delivery method to actually make this work well for your employees. We also asked people about their use of the browser. And information workers in general say they spend an average of 2.7 hours every day working on a web browser, but among cloud workers, who we'll get to in a moment, that number jumps up to 4.6. So part of this move toward solving mobility, the any device, anytime, anywhere conundrum, is actually lying in the browser. Delivery of applications and content and assets over the cloud. Finally, with a growing appetite for cloud-native experiences, we asked people, how hard is it for you to adjust to using the browser to do your work? And again, 94% say the browser is equally easy or easier to learn to use than desktop. That's a pretty striking number right there as well. So with this predicate, what we've tried to establish here is employees have changing needs, they have changing expectations. IT is on board with sort of fixing those problems. And at the same time, we have this behavioral shift that's moving people more strongly toward the browser, toward the cloud, and toward the need to work anywhere, anytime. So what that means is, when we look at this in a segment, we identified that there is a group of super cloud users. We call them cloud workers. These are information workers who use a laptop or tablet for work purposes, who use cloud applications, cloud-delivered applications daily, and spend 3 hours or more per week using a web browser. So that means that about 1 in 4 information workers has already qualified as this emerging category of cloud worker. Again, these are people who are somewhat super users who are already there. They're already engaging in these behaviors. And what we found is that even more than your average information worker, these folks are discerning, and they demand certain things. They demand flexibility to work from anywhere at a higher rate than the rest of the information workers. They're comfortable switching between devices. And many of us have, in this room are probably like this. We have the ability to kind of start something on one device, pick it up on another device that's contextually easy for us. But sometimes that experience of transition isn't always as easy as we would like at work, for example. And these folks rely much more on the web browser than they did 2 years ago. So we asked them, how has your use of a browser changed? And we've seen incredibly high adoption and changes in that. So the cloud worker is kind of at the vanguard of this revolution. They're the ones who are working anytime, anywhere. They're finding a lot of value in the cloud. They're finding a lot of value in the browser. Okay, so we've established a set of needs here that are important. We've established that there's a group of super users that we call cloud workers. Now, what are some of the approaches that you can take and your peers are taking to address those changing needs? So a lot of these IT decision makers that we interviewed or that we surveyed say that they're beginning to employ a cloud-first approach to their business apps. This should come as no surprise to you here at this event that business applications are increasingly being delivered over the cloud. It also comes as no surprise to you, however, that that isn't an overnight phenomenon, that there is a lot of investment and planning required there. This move, though, increases the importance of having a browser strategy for your workers and for your enterprise. And that means that both for IT, from the management perspective, but also from the employee perspective, you have to have a codified strategy for thinking about the browser. And what role is it playing in the day-to-day life of your employees? It also opens the door to some new device categories. That is to say, as some of these groups are moving to the cloud, perhaps they can go cloud native in the devices that they use. So back to a little bit of data here, right? We asked the IT decision makers what some of their preferences were, what's important to them, and we also asked, again, in parallel, what was it that employees valued out of this? So let's start with the employees. Being able to use technology to access company resources gives me a better work-life balance. This is an interesting one. There's a lot of debate about this. For some people, you might think that giving you anytime access is actually a negative, that maybe you work too much. Here, 69% of these workers said it's the opposite. They can prioritize their time better, and I know this is kind of how I tend to work. If I can prioritize my time better, I'm going to be able to get that work done later at night if that's more convenient for me. So, again, ITDMs take a bit of action on that sentiment. So 81% say that they are taking a cloud-first approach or prioritizing cloud for their new business applications at a minimum, even as they retrofit some of the older ones. Second up, technologies that help me collaborate with colleagues are critical to my success. I'm sure most of us have experienced this. 71% say it is critical to their success. And the counter to that is that IT decision makers at a rate of 73% see cloud as a way to drive AI into workforce applications. Now, this is a new horizon, right? But this is something that we call at Forrester everyday AI. It is that infusion of AI into the applications that your workers are using on a daily basis and helping them to complete tasks more quickly. And I think you've seen some of that demonstrated at this event. And finally, I rely much more heavily on a web browser to do my job today than I did 2 years ago. So overwhelmingly, people believe this. And as a result, the IT decision makers are responding. And they say the browser has become more important to their IT strategy due to high use of browser-based business apps. So this is interesting, right? I mean, where we are today is at this inflection point. We're already starting to see among many of your peers very cloud-centric, browser-centric behaviors. But we also know that that journey is not complete. So the message here is this is the time to be investing in these areas. Now, there's a lot of data on this slide, but it's a similar kind of idea for the IT decision makers. So let me tap into just a few of the ideas. We asked IT decision makers, what are some of the big picture goals that are important to you? Now, I'm sure everybody in this room will agree that reducing costs is always part of the picture, and 70% agreed with that as well. But there were some other important things that came out that we thought were part of the cloud worker story as well. Things like increasing security, being able, in the world of swapping off devices, making those trade-offs, continuing work across multiple devices, how do you ensure security? This is a conundrum. Investing in technologies that improve employee productivity. Obviously, this is part and parcel of employee experience. As Dave is the expert on, if I want to be really having a good experience, I want to be able to do my best work. I want to be productive. And investing in technologies that improve collaboration or better supporting mobility and flexibility among the workforce. Now, I'm guessing that most of you are on that journey as well, trying to solve all of these big picture goals. And as we see, your peers agree. Now, there are some specific technology priorities that we asked about as well that popped up among many of your peers. Increase our use of cloud infrastructure and platforms. I'm supposing many of you are doing that. Expand our use of cloud-based applications for employees, and invest in AI and machine learning to help employees work smarter. So I hope you're starting to see the picture emerge. The cloud is going to play a very critical role in stitching together all of these different priorities. That is to say, I need to keep costs under control, but I need to be flexible enough to empower my workers who have increasingly high expectations. We have a little bit more data. I hope you're still data hungry here. We asked employees about being able to use technology to access company resources. Does this give you the better work-life balance? Yes. We've seen that along with how the ITDMs are taking action here. I think this actually may be a duplicate slide. So I'm going to skip it because we've already talked this through. So we're actually going backwards. That's the problem. My apologies. My apologies. Technology strategy in the age of the cloud worker. So we've sort of established kind of the need and the trend. We've seen that a lot of your peers are actually doing some of these things. So what do you do about it? Well, I will start out with part of that strategy, and Dave will continue. Technology strategy in the age of this cloud worker involves several steps on your part. One is to figure out and then solve for key pain points among your employees. Second, optimize and present the right device portfolio for your workers, right? I'm on the go, I may need particular kinds of devices. In this new cloud world, by the way, you have more options about how you equip people. And then considering cloud native computers. For those who are in the cloud worker categories, those who have really moved to that endpoint, it may be that new devices entirely are appropriate for them. Okay, so what is it that workers want out of their devices? Well, as you might imagine, they want productivity, they want flexibility, they want convenience, and so we asked them about a set of categories as well. Ability to fix issues without losing productivity. This is a big one, and I'm sure that any of you who have traveled for work, as I often do, are facing this problem. If the device that you have goes down and your work is tied to that device, you have a lot of problems. I remember I had a trip where I was flying to China, and I had a catastrophic failure of a computer. This was a problem. Ability to access work files and apps from anywhere on any device. Again, consistent with, this is all the information workers, but cloud workers are particularly interested in this. Single sign-on to accounts and applications. This is an interesting one. This can drive a certain level of employee experience. When you're not managing passwords all day, sometimes that can be a better experience. Continuity of passwords, bookmarks, plugins across devices. This is becoming increasingly important as we think about all of the different access points that we have, whether those are applications or particular content, or just shortcuts that help us to do our work. We want to make sure those travel with us rather than being something that we have just on one machine. And the ability to collaborate in real time on documents and files, and the ability of browser plugins and extensions to support work tasks. Both of those are emerging tech sort of needs here, but among cloud workers, they pop up even higher. So what you can take from this is that there's a solid base of data that if you choose to engage in any of these things, workers are telling us that they are interested and that this will make their lives better. What is it that you guys want? Many of you are IT decision makers. Well, your peers are saying that they want to pursue reliable, versatile devices and secure, fast, highly compatible browsers to meet these needs. So we asked, what are some critical capabilities or very important capabilities when selecting laptops, workstations for the workforce? Things like reliability, easy or automatic security and software updates, and processing speed all came up. And this makes sense, right? I mean, these are good for IT, they're good for workers as well. We also asked, when choosing a browser, what are the things you're looking for? Compatibility with critical and most common business applications, browser security features, and browser performance speed. Now, these things may be sort of self-evident. You know, you may say, of course, these are things that ITDMs want. But the question has been, were they able to accomplish them? And we're sort of at that inflection point where this is possible. We also find that cloud-native computers are on the agenda for more and more IT decision makers. That is to say, 79% of enterprises report some interest, plans, or current use of cloud-native computers for a portion of their workforce. So the typical situation here is you identify a subgroup within your workforce that is a cloud worker, ideally, that has the kind of job where the benefits of a cloud-native computer are evident. You do some testing, and Dave is going to teach you all about how to segment the workforce to find who those people are. But we're also finding that right now, the general consensus among this group on average is pretty distributed. You can see that there's a curve here. But it does say that there is an average of about 42% of workers who they think would be a good candidate for the cloud-based computers. And finally, we also have to think about our refresh cycles, right? We're all out here trying to do a great job of providing hardware to our workforces. We ask people, how often do you update your fleet of company-owned laptops, desktops, workstations? You know, some of them are doing it annually. Some of them are doing it every 1 to 2 years here. Many others are, you know, a little bit of a longer tail here. Among those who are using cloud-based computers, as you might imagine, it's those who are sort of on the forefront. They're the ones who are doing it very frequently. They're trying to respond to the needs in real time, essentially. So you're seeing on this end lots of interest among those users. So what I hope I've established for you guys, despite my little flub with the clicker, is that there is an inflection point right now. We're at a moment where the changing needs of the workers are sort of intersecting with the technology that's available to help them do their jobs appropriately. So my takeaways before passing you to Dave are, I would recommend that you get to know the cloud worker. There's lots of data that you can share from this presentation afterwards, but understand who are your cloud workers, what are some of the needs and activities that they're doing today, and what would be helpful tomorrow. Dave will teach you all about segmenting the workforce, and a focus on employee experience here is crucial. Interviewing your workers, surveying your workers, doing ethnographic work, following around your workers is a great idea. The more you can get into the heads of what's actually making people productive, happy, and successful, the more you can actually make that happen. And of course, finally, make security a part of your cloud journey. This is crucial. Endpoints are a very, very common contagion point for the access of malware and other problems, and we want to make sure that that's part of this as well. Okay, well, I'm going to pass it to Dave, who's going to talk a good bit about how employee segmentation falls short.
Thank you, JP.
You're very welcome.
Nicely done, sir. Appreciate it. How many of you currently segment your workforce today for technology in some way or another? Anybody? Couple, okay. It's something that we see increasingly commonly, and we'll see some of the data on this in just a minute, but you know, over the last 7 years that I've been at Forrester, I've been involved in a number of these projects of segmentation for very large organizations, large global enterprises, government agencies, and so on. And you know, early on, demonstrating my incompetence, right, as I learned, and things got better over time. But some of the things that we've learned from this is that almost always, and I love our inquiry calls on this because our clients are really struggling with this in many ways too, and if they're going to call us and set up some time on their calendar, they've already exhausted every other resource, right, to try and find out a better way to do this. And so it's usually a good conversation. But usually what we find is they've tried to go through the process of segmentation to just better tailor the environment that they provide to their employees and better optimize costs and so on. And they always end up with like, oh my God, we got 30 personas, right? We got 30 different profiles we're going to try to support. My general feeling on this is if you end up with any more than 6, you did it wrong. And there's going to be some things underneath that, right, that will differentiate some of those, and we'll talk about those. But just at a high level, it should not be a painful exercise. The difference is now in the amount of information that you can take advantage of that's available to take a much more fact-based approach. And so what we've found for a long time is as companies are starting this process, they're usually starting with a device-based approach and to improve employee experience in some way. But they're really not optimized, right? There's a lot more that people need than just the device that they're going to use. How are they going to access applications? How much time do they spend on planes? And you might have people that fill the same role in a company, like claims adjusters in an insurance company. You might assume that they all do the same thing and work in the same way, but they don't, right? Some of them are working on cars in a facility. Some of them are working in different ways. And so factoring in some of those things into the environment that you provide matters a lot. And what happens then is if you get it wrong, the ability to collaborate, those little tiny things that just get in the way, it could be having to log on or the technology doesn't work just right, that prevent people and become kind of a cognitive load, right, that's in the way of collaborating. And this is one of the reasons why we've seen such a continuum of movement away from on-premises things and heavy devices toward a much more agile and cloud-based approach to working. And so we'll go into that a little more. I mentioned earlier that a lot of our work here, and a lot of my work here, has been in psychological research and trying to understand people's behavior patterns and what that means. But another big part of our research is in customer experience. So we think a great deal as a firm about how technologies affect customer experience, how they affect people's motivation, how employee experience affects customer experience. And there's a lot of good data and research out there on this, right? So there's a lot of good things. And what we're finding our clients wanting to do is say, can we use some of this to build a business case? Can we use some of this to set our strategy and our approach? One of the most important insights that I have from all the time that I've spent doing employee experience research, and if there's really nothing else that you take away from this, apart from the cloud worker, rise of the cloud worker and ways to meet it, this is a really important insight. And that is that what most of the world thinks they understand about what makes people happy and motivated and engaged at work is at best incomplete and at worst completely wrong, right? So survey any group of 1,000 managers, and we do this all the time. Ask them to rank for you in order of importance of what you think makes people happiest and engaged at work, all right? And they'll rank things like recognition at the very top, very common with HR organizations as well, to think in terms of recognition, or pay for performance, or a range of other things, important work, good colleagues, right? It's not that those things aren't important. It's just that they're not the most important. It turns out, and this is the work of a Harvard professor named Dr. Teresa Amabile, A-M-A-B-I-L-E. She's fantastic. There's a TED Talk out there. I've interviewed her. We've collaborated. She's amazing. What she discovered was that the most important factor, right, in employee engagement motivation is the ability to make progress every single day on the work that they believe is most important. I'll say it again, to be able to make progress every day on the work that they believe is most important, getting things done. It's tied to safety, psychologically. It's a whole bunch of reasons for it, but it's tied to a bunch of things. And we always tend to take this for granted. Like, oh, yeah, of course they're going to get things done. But yet we continue to put things in their way. Compliance mandates come in. Decisions come in about technology deployment strategy and other things that get in the way. And next thing you know, this is eroding steadily as we go. One of the good, really prominent example of this for me was working with a large drugstore chain. Their pharmacists were leaving. They were having a hard time retaining pharmacists. They were leaving to competitors. Their pay level was above others in the industry. What's going on? Well, the exit interviews were saying the same things. It's too stinking hard to get anything done here. It's too hard to serve our customers. I've got to run back and forth between the drugs and the computer 5 times for every prescription I fill. And we've got all these problems with insurance claims that we have to deal with and so on. It's just too hard. It's just too hard. I'm sorry, I'm leaving. And so they were very interested in trying to find a better way, right, that was going to help their pharmacists do better. But the real root cause here was that years and years of compliance legislation and mandates and so on had been handed down, but nobody had really thought about it from the perspective of that pharmacist, right? What do they have to do, and how is this going to affect their workflow and their workload every day? Part of segmentation is bigger than devices. It is understanding how people work, and we have more data for that now. And there's lots of studies here that show the links between employee experience and customer experience. For example, this great Yale study, they do good studies there, that show that it has a positive and statistically significant effect on Net Promoter Score, and we find the same thing. When we interview companies who have made gains in our customer experience index, almost always they have made significant investments in employee-facing technology. You can't take it for granted anymore. Maersk Lines as well, right? Big impacts on customer satisfaction score. And I have this last one in here for a reason, because again, I want to highlight employees will self-report and say, recognize me more, right? If you survey them, they'll typically say, recognize me more, but statistically and scientifically, it is being able to make progress and get things done. So I just want to, again, mention that one more time. And as part of the study, we got a lot of really nice interviews and a lot of really nice quotes, and I love this one, an IT director at a US wholesale company. We're reinventing the company culture as far as how we work and how we collaborate with others. We've implemented some really good systems that have allowed us to open up a lot of closed areas of the business to many more people, allowing for free-flowing communication. They thought of it as a culture initiative, right? Not just a technology initiative. They wanted to change the culture, and they understood that the technology decisions they were making and fostering cloud workers could help them change that culture. So I want to point that out. And another thing that was a nice thing to see come through these interviews, and I absolutely love this one, innovation, right? We all, executive boards and others are always talking about, yes, we have an innovative culture and so on, but yet everybody's completely overloaded. Their calendars are full, and it's ridiculous, right? They can't, it's a struggle. What they're trying to do, and what this person was doing is a CTO at a technology company in the UK. They like black swans, right? And they're events that are unexpected, low probability, but have a huge impact. Little discoveries, right? And you have to create a platform that maximizes that probability to take place. And the key to that is cooperation and diversity. Try to have systems that allow all sources of knowledge to be embedded in them. So what people really need when they're thinking through complexity, and this is what knowledge workers do, right? We deal with complexity every day. When we're thinking through these things, having task-critical information, having the ability to be able to go and find what we need in that moment and answer a question, this is one of the reasons why Google became so popular, because we can get an answer quickly to our questions, is to create the space for that and create the time for that and enable this in some way. And a lot of times, these end up saving the company. And I've got several stories of companies who have been saved by these black swans, right, and these ideas that came from employees. And, we are seeing companies move away from a one-size-fits-all approach to segmentation, so getting a little bit more differentiated in the way that they serve different workers, but yet still, right, this is too big. This is way, way, way too big. Most users are provided with a standard model or a standard device, right, but a small portion are provided with special equipment for their needs. It needs to be bigger, right? It needs to be bigger. And one of the other things that's also happened because of compliance mandates and security is not only do we just give them a standard issue machine, but we also lock it down, so we make it impossible for them to make any changes and use other applications. We assume that they're here to do a job like drones. We don't think that they're going to be an important source of innovation and ideas. Giving them more flexibility and opening up that door to a little bit more choice, right, in cloud services, allowing them to be able to use more cloud services can make a big difference and have a big impact. And people perceive it as a more flexible way to work and having more options and more autonomy, which is a primary source of this intrinsic motivation that people really thrive on. And, it opens the door to new device form factors as well, right? You can consider other things, particularly when the cost is competitive or even less than a traditional PC might be. We also see companies willing to co-invest as part of their strategy with things like VDI or, more commonly now, cloud workspaces, right? Being able to take the Windows applications that people use, could be something that's particularly difficult to manage or deploy, and be willing to put it into a cloud workspace environment that they can access through a browser or through a native client that runs on a cloud computer, and give access to it that way. It simplifies manageability. You don't have to deploy this beast anymore, right? A lot of things get better in that approach. And I understand, cloud workspaces and VDI technologies also add some complexity. I'd like to encourage companies to think of it as a secondary approach, right? As a secondary desktop approach. And, they also try to segment based on functional role, and that doesn't really work very well either, right? We always try to make the assumption that, okay, well, this person's in sales, so they've got the same kind of function and working. You have a sales and marketing executive, marketing setup, you have an executive setup, everybody has a standard image laptop that's configured the same way. That would be the standard, a balance of all things to try and satisfy everybody. We think that this really falls short. This is one particular person that we interviewed for this that we felt was falling short in what they could do. And we've also seen a change in what's being provisioned, and this is nice. So much, much more commonly now we're seeing laptops being provisioned as a primary device rather than desktop PCs. Just a few years ago it was about 80% desktop PCs for knowledge workers. Now it's much more on laptops. But laptops are not that far away from a cloud-based computer, right? It's a half step there. And so for different types here in green, right, for example, we see for executives about 63%, and always at least half are being provisioned with laptops first, and that's a good trend. That's a good trend. We hope that will continue. But one of the other problems that we see with this approach is they'll wait for complaints, right? They'll wait for complaints to come into the service desk and say, well, nobody's complaining, so everything must be okay. No, right? No, it's not enough. You have to develop that understanding of how people work and what they need to have a true understanding of it. Most of the time, people aren't going to complain because they just accept it as the way it is. It stinks here, right? It's hard to get things done. I know that if I submit a ticket for something different, it's going to get declined, so why worry? Why complain? You can't rely on the tickets coming into the service desk for that. And there's also the data that shows that there's a big gap, right, between the technology that people are actually using every day and what they would prefer to be using given the choice. This is a really important metric to pay attention to, and maybe you could even add this to the survey that you might deploy inside your organization to understand how big is this gap for you and how does that compare. But it's significant. And so really the net is that these approaches are not optimized, right? They're not optimized, and there are new ways to do this. 94% of employees use a connected device for work purposes while traveling or commuting or at home. 80% say their success depends on instant access to information from a wide variety of sources. You remember what I said at the beginning, that being able to make progress every day, being able to get things done, this is where it comes, right? Is being able to find information. Being able to stay in flow requires task-critical information. And they also say that 71% say that technologies that help them collaborate with their colleagues are critical to their success. So very important, right? Very good sources of data. So these are the reasons why they tend to fall short. Decision makers tend to depend on input from multiple players, but they're really not getting at the underlying data. They don't have a good fact-based approach here. They'll interview people and kind of get a feel for it and go based on that, but that's really not enough. And so really not doing enough analysis of behavior. And now we've got more sources of behavior, right? Cloud-based computers and cloud-based services can give you a better idea of exactly how people are working and what they're doing and where they are. There's more of that coming with the metrics and analytics out there. So you can start to use that in your segmentation approach. And so they're really informed by two little variables currently. And they struggle to balance security and cost priorities as well. And there's a woman right now that is got a new role at a large financial services company. I had an inquiry with her about a month ago, and we stayed in touch since that time. Her job, she sits within the IT organization. Her role is employee experience, right? Not in HR. It's within technology. And the reason for that is, again, the same thing was they were having people leave the organization. The exit interviews were also saying it's too difficult to work here. You've got everything locked down. There's no trust. It's a real problem for us. So her job, her mandate from the CEO is to improve the situation and push things the other way. Now, in financial services, compliance is huge, right? You've got these mandates that require all kinds of permissions, all kinds of other things, and locking things down. She's trying to wedge that door open, but what she's finding is she goes to talk to compliance people, the compliance officers in the company, is they're just kind of standing there like this, like, well, sounds like a problem. It's not my problem, right? The change that's going to come, and it's happening right now in these organizations, the change that's going to come is that everybody is going to be responsible for employee experience and solving this problem because the data is coming in and companies are beginning to realize through Glassdoor and other places that they don't have a good experience. There are dirty laundries out there for everybody to see. So changing that and enforcing that door open and helping compliance and security people understand that their job is not just compliance, it is also enablement, and not giving up on either. It's achieving both of those goals is going to be really, really important, and that's changing right now. So again, they're top of mind. Security is a big concern. If confidentiality is breached because of a theft of a computer, the company can have serious legal problems. This is what everybody can see, right? This is the part that's obvious to everybody. I can see the risk. I can see the problems that will happen if somebody has a mistake and does something, right? But what they can't see are the consequences of too strict of security controls on people's productivity and motivation and engagement, and that's where we come in. We know that there's a lot of value, but at the same time, we don't have all the money to go and spend. Sure, there are cost constraints, right? Everybody's dealing with cost constraints. But a lot of these things, like segmentation, are really not that difficult. And as a matter of fact, you'll probably save money by providing a more optimized approach. And cloud-based computers are cheaper, right? And they're easier to manage. It's not uncommon that we find, maybe one full-time employee for every 1,000 PCs in a company to be managed. And we think about cloud-based computers, it could be 20 to 30,000, right? For the same full-time employee. And so it leads to a lot of work disruptions, a lot of distractions in their primary work location, right? Only about 56% really believe that their company does a good job of providing an environment where they can be productive. Now, we ran an employee experience index survey for the first time at the end of last year. We looked at all the different factors out there to try and understand what correlated most strongly with a positive employee experience, right? And we used the work of Dr. Amabile. I collaborated with other psychologists at MIT and at Utrecht in the Netherlands to try and put together the right index, because we didn't want to have the street lamp effect, which is the drunkard looking for his keys under the street lamp because that's what the light is, right? We wanted to shine a light on, but his keys are under the car. We wanted to shine the light under the car and get at these factors. The highest, most important factor in all that data was this one. This had the highest, above important work, above good managers, all these things, that their company does a good job of providing an environment where they can be productive. This number should be 90% or higher. It should be really high, right? This is what everybody should strive for. And how often do they experience these problems, like a technology problem disrupting them or getting interrupted because they can't find the information that they need? Really, really common, right? Really, really common that this is happening a lot. Lots of work disruption here that's technology related. And we've also run the surveys on, to understand sources of distraction for people. They keep rising. Technology related distractions keep rising. So. And through an auditor or compliance perspective, again, this IT director, we're like heroes, but through a user perspective, not so much. So they're forced to serve the needs of compliance people right now more than employees. That's a real problem. And one of the biggest challenges have been when certain employees would lose more than half a week just dealing with systems. And this has happened. It's happened at Forrester, right? Where JP's had this experience, I know, as have I, where we lose a day or two just with something stupid, like trying to get access and not being able to reset a password or whatever. So the idea to improve segmentation now, right, is one way of approaching this and finding ways to optimize and maybe give more people cloud-based workstations or cloud-based computers. It opens the door. A lot fewer compromises between cost and security and employee experience. And as cloud workers emerge and this segment grows, and again, if you look at the data over a long period of time, it continues to move more and more and more toward cloud, right? This is inevitable. It's going to continue marching this way. And so you can do a better job of supporting things like collaboration needs than you can with internally based systems, right? There's a lot that goes into that. And it also allows for new technology strategies that help balance cost and security better. And here's some of the quotes. Cloud's changing the way that we work. You have to change the way that you choose devices for employees. That doesn't mean you're not spending the most money on it, right? Don't just buy PCs because they're selling PCs. Make sure that they're the most effective choice, and I would agree. And more concerned about having the data on a hard drive. Cloud has benefits for security now, and that wasn't commonly understood even as early as 5 years ago or as recent as 5 years ago. Now companies are starting to get it. Honda, for example, they lost a lot of data on their engineers' workstations in the earthquake and tsunami a couple of years ago. They're moving all their critical data into cloud-based systems, and for that purpose, for disaster recovery, and they're finding an employee experience benefit at the same time. Their engineers are not tied to a big workstation anymore, right? Their engineers get to use a laptop or a cloud computer, whatever they want, from anywhere, and still do big design work, and there's a real advantage to that. And it's become beneficial. Cloud-based collaboration has become so beneficial. You don't have to use 3 other tools. People find it to be really productive. If you can have a cloud-based collaboration tool, you're going to have a better result. So again, as JP mentioned earlier, we're seeing this cloud worker segment continue to grow, and so I won't delay on this slide. And you know, millennials also entering the workforce are changing the way we think about technology. But we're also finding with older workers, there was some concern early on that this shift to cloud, you know, based computing was going to be harder on older workers who are used to doing things the same way. To some extent that's true, but in our research we found it really is not as big of a deal. I mean, how many of you have a mom or a dad on Facebook, right? They've gotten used to using cloud-based services and cloud-based applications, and so things have gotten easier. So it's not the barrier that it once was. And it'd be much cheaper to do maintenance on. This is a significant thing. Again, I've spent a lot of time, I've written the requirements for 3 different client management product lines out there in the market before. That's an area that I know really well. It's a pain. Nobody knows how to use SCCM really well, right? It's much easier if you can have a very simple way to manage a lot of devices. And so our recommendations here are to really develop a fact-based approach first and foremost, right? Use as much data as you can to get this right, develop a good approach. Hopefully you're going to find somewhere between 4 and 6 personas based on their behavior and based on what they do. You will find that there are going to be other things underneath those personas that you'll have to provide. So it's a little bit of a sub-segmentation, but it generally works that way. And define a lot of variables to inform these choices. Go beyond what you normally would. Go beyond devices. Go further. And look at who in your organization would benefit from using a cloud-based computer. And you'll find that there will be people who will benefit from it. They'll prefer it. And develop that target profile, right, for those who'd be a good fit for it, and then use that as the basis for moving ahead with the whole process. And also sharing using that profile to continue to identify more employees who actually share similar characteristics, and you can expand the footprint later. So that's it. Thank you.